Let me tell you a story about the day that time stopped. It didn't stop in the literal sense, not even in a poetic one. It just stopped. Somewhere in between. Somewhere dark. I guess if we measure time by meaning, then losing everything you've ever loved can stop it in its tracks. And I guess that's what happened to me. From the moment I stepped into that room, everything changed. Thinking back now, I still remember her eyes, wet and swollen. And I remember his quiet, blank stare. He looked like a man that had been caught in a situation like this before. He didn't speak, not once, as the realization washed over me. But I guess a situation like that speaks for itself. No. That's all I said. What an idiot. I can't. I have to leave. And that was that. There was no grand speech, no outburst of anger, no tears of my own, no sorrow, no sadness, no emotion whatsoever. No, I simply said nothing. She, however, was inconsolable. She begged, she pleaded, she tried to follow. She tried reasoning, but I was numb to her. She could have provided me 1,000 different reasons in 1,000 different ways, but it would have made little difference. She could have comforted me, lied to me, told me there had been a mistake and that she loved me, that we'd figure it out together. But I know, deep down, nothing would have stopped me. I went home, I packed, and I left. And that was it. I disappeared. I slipped from the world, never to be seen or heard from again. That was the day that time stopped. After that day, my life became a journey, and my home became the airport. I moved from place to place, plane to plane, terminal to terminal. I drifted from Paris to Belgium to Germany, never staying long enough to be found or to feel. Until one day, I was sitting outside a cafe in Amsterdam. It was the middle of July, and it had been 3 months since I left. It was almost 7 o'clock, and the sun was beginning to set. The air was still, the night fresh, and my coffee crisp. All around me, tourists moved, and amongst them, scattered locals hurried home. Since that day, I hadn't stopped and allowed myself a second to breathe. But in that moment, I paused, inhaled, and unsurprisingly, my thoughts returned to her. The memory was a favourite of mine, not too long after we'd married. If you could go anywhere in the world, where would it be? Anywhere, as long as it's with you. She smiled that cute, little, fragile smile. So perfect, so innocent. No, really, if you could go anywhere, where would it be? Alaska. Alaska? Why? The Northern Lights. I don't know. I've always wanted to see them. I mean, they're magical, you know. Things like that remind you of just how fragile life is. I guess I always imagined travelling to Alaska to see them when I met someone worth seeing them with. She rolled on top of me in the bed and smiled an even wider smile, but this time cheeky and wild. "Aw, are you getting emotional?" she teased. "Are you my emotional little man?" I smiled. "It would be an important moment." She chuckled. "An important moment?" And then she tickled me, and we laughed. We laughed for a long time, and then we kissed. "I love you," I told her. "I love you too." And we promised that day that one day we would see the lights together. But we never did. Raising a sleeve, I wiped away the tears and left. The urge to move again was strong. The urge to run unbearable. Almost as if I kept moving, if I kept running, that memory and the memory of her wouldn't be able to catch me. That time itself would not be able to keep up. That somehow, if I never stopped, time wouldn't resume, and somehow I could live within my memories forever. I just had to keep moving. Reality would never find me. So, I made my way to the airport, and before I knew it, I was once again moving. If only I'd known that you can't run forever. The flight to Canada was long, but peaceful. It was night. The dull hum of the plane's engines and the low light eased my mind, and I found myself drifting somewhere in the space between sleep and reality. Around me, passengers slept and small monitors glowed, displaying maps that tracked our progress. I moved within my chair, trying to get comfortable, and it was then, in that moment, I saw him. Through the small crack between the seats in front of me, about 3 to 4 rows down, he was there. His neck was bent, his face strained and angled backward so he could look at me. His eyes were blank and his gaze emotionless. It was him. Somehow, he'd found me, and for some reason, he was following me. I immediately looked away and shifted, trying to shield myself behind the chair. I felt my heart quicken, and suddenly, the still and quiet confines of the cabin felt thick and foreboding. Without thinking, I chanced another peek between the gap, and sure enough, he was still there, looking back at me and smiling. Slowly, he raised a finger to his lips, urging me to remain silent. Instantly, I moved, trying my best to hide my body, to make myself small enough to disappear into the chair, away from him. How did he find me? Had he been following me? For how long? Why? My mind raced with a million thoughts, each more haunting and nastier than the last. Why was he here? After all, he'd already taken everything from me. What else was there to take? The terrible thoughts followed me for the remainder of the flight. They followed me from the airport to the next hotel, and they persisted as I rented a car. They followed me into the night, along the winding roads and highways, all the way to Alaska. And so did he. For the weeks that followed, he was there. He never approached me, choosing to remain a good distance away. Enough not to alarm, but close enough that I would know he was there. He wanted me to see him. He wanted me to know that there was no escape. No matter when I moved or how careful I was, sure enough, after a few hours of peace, I would see him again. When I stopped for food, when I stopped to sleep, wherever I was, whenever I was, so was he. A constant reminder, a splinter of the life I'd tried to escape. He was unrelenting. He was unstoppable. Like the passage of time, he continued to tick onward. A constant reminder that no matter how hard I ran, he would always be there. It was a game of cat and mouse, of hide and seek, but somehow different. Instead of a childhood game, something sicklier and seeping remained. A creeping sense of dread that only grew the closer I got to my destination. It felt like a reminder or a promise that something terrible was about to happen. And for the longest time, that was my life. He was always just out of reach, but close enough to let me know that I hadn't managed to lose him. He never once got close to me. He never once tried to talk to me. He simply seemed content that I knew he was there. And somehow, that terrified me. And I thought that was the worst he could do. Right up until the moment he decided that he'd been distant for long enough. I'd been travelling sporadically for a few months. It was early September. I was a few miles outside of Fairbanks, and I'd stopped in a motel for the night. I was tired, I was exhausted, and I'd slowly, over the past few months, begun to feel drained. The journey and my shadow were taking their toll. I knew I had to rest. I'd been hiding away in my room for days. I couldn't leave. I ordered room service whenever I grew hungry. Laying there, in the dead of night, I realised I hadn't seen another person for almost a week. Suddenly, I felt so alone. I'd left everything behind. My whole life, everything, and I hadn't thought about it, not even for a second. It had taken him to remind me of what I'd done. My thoughts naturally moved to her, and suddenly I realised that I could barely remember her face. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps edged towards my door. Within the darkness, he approached. My head turned towards the door. I could see his shadow. Everything felt wrong. The air suffocated, and his shadow, creeping in through the crack beneath the door, seeped black. I held my breath and waited. Somewhere, an air conditioner hummed. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He simply stood outside the door. I couldn't see him, but I knew it was him. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. With shaking hands, I retrieved the phone from the table. "Time is running out," the first message said. My brain fizzed. Another message. "No one knows you're here." And then, another. "You're going to die." Suddenly, the reasons for my departure seemed fallible. In that moment, as the terror gripped me, my thoughts returned to her once again. I missed her so much. But then a question pierced my thoughts. Would she even recognize you? The question was valid. It had been so long and I'd changed so much. The journey had changed me. I wasn't the person I used to be, that time, so long ago. I was weaker, I was different, and I was not me. He told me that time was running out, and in that moment, for the first time in such a long time, time seemed to resume. No longer was it paused, no longer had it stopped. It had begun to flow once more, and suddenly I came to realise that he was right. There wasn't much left. I had to keep going. What used to be a stream was now no more than a trickle, and if I didn't keep moving, he would catch me. And it terrified me that I didn't know what would happen when he did. Outside of my room, he moved away, and his shadow blended back into the darkness of the night. Inside my room, I cried myself to sleep. The next morning, I drove. Behind me, fate kept pace. With each turn, with each stretch of road, he followed. He matched my turns. He matched my speed. He matched my destination, but with each remaining mile, it bothered me less. I'd been moving. I'd been running. I'd been hiding for so very long, but I was almost there. I had to be. I'd become a shell, a result of a choice. The natural conclusion of the journey. I was weak, tired, and spent. Wherever the road led me, I knew that when I got there, that my journey would come to an end. The day turned to night, and suddenly, I knew it was time to stop. Pulling off from the road, I found a quiet little spot, covered lightly in snow, next to a blue, frozen lake. Stepping out of the car into the cold night air felt like entering a fairy tale. Around me, nature exhaled, its breath misting slightly on the horizon, and above me, the cosmos stretched in a wide, beautiful blue. I moved towards the frozen lake as he pulled his car in behind of mine. Before, his presence would have scared me, but now I was past caring. I breathed deeply and smiled, tilting my head upward as the heavens smiled back. This moment was mine. If I listened hard enough, the sound of nothing could be heard. The soft green glow above was perfect. It was everything I'd ever imagined it to be. Everything I'd ever hoped it to be. It was purity in arcs, spread beautifully across the sky, but it wasn't quite right. It should have been the both of us. My eyes began to tear as my mind went back to the memory. If you could go anywhere, where would it be? He approached from behind and stopped. Alaska, I whispered. I continued to stare up into the sky as I felt him nod. It's time for me to go home, isn't it? He nodded again. Okay. This night was everything. Above me, meaning painted the sky. The mesh of colours against the backdrop of infinity created a sense of peace that washed pleasantly across me. It had been so long since I'd felt happiness. In that moment, I felt calm. I felt content. But I didn't feel complete. In that moment, in that perfect, never-ending moment, I knew I would trade it all, if I could, for just one more minute with her. Can I stay here, just for a minute longer? You have time. Thank you. The journey home was a blur. Each step of the way, he was there, but this time, closer. I texted her before boarding the final flight, and for the final hours, he kept me company. Before, his presence was horrid, but after running for so long, it suddenly felt comforting. Acceptance was everything. We landed, I disembarked, and after a few moments, I saw her. Immediately, she started to cry, and she rushed me, locking me in a tight embrace. Why? I'd been travelling for 6 months, and with all of that time, I'd contemplated the question. I knew she would ask it. I knew she would want to know, but standing there, I still didn't have an answer. I simply spoke, and honesty poured from me. I couldn't let you watch me. I couldn't let you watch me die. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she squeezed me tighter. I told you that we could figure this out together. You didn't have to leave. Why did you leave me? After everything I'd been through, after everything I'd put her through, after losing myself and forgetting the things that mattered most, in the face of oblivion and the cowardly action I'd taken. In that moment, I decided I would be a coward no more. Lies were meaningless. I was scared. She cried harder and hugged me tighter, and there, I decided to let it all go. Every fear, every last ounce of fight, the need to control, to run, to escape, all of it. I simply let it all go, and I found peace within her arms. Finally, after so much searching, I found the very thing I'd forgotten. Finally, I felt complete. This time, I didn't run. She chuckled through tears. "Look at us getting emotional," she joked. "Am I your emotional little woman?" And we laughed. We laughed for a long time. And then we kissed. "I love you," I told her. "I love you too." Behind me, I felt him come closer. He'd always looked like the doctor, but I always knew it wasn't really him. It was always about what he represented. Originally, a fear, but now, more of a reminder. He moved in, placed his arm on my shoulder, and smiled. I knew that time had never stopped that day, so long ago. It had continued to flow along on its unstoppable path, and somehow, along that path, I'd forgotten that it was precious, that it was sacred, and that it was meant to be spent with those that make it feel endless. "Did you make it?" Somehow, she knew. I did. She squeezed my hand. Was it an important moment? Behind of us, he followed. One day, maybe tomorrow, maybe not, I would go with him, and it would all be over. But that day was not today. Not as important as this one.